While people from the steering committee gather, a couple of things I want to mention. First of all, the very preliminary version of that document was actually written by about 6 different people, different parts written by different people. And so we needed an expert to make that into a coherent draft. And so I want to thank Cindy Moser, the manager of communications at the Institute for Work and Health, who was that expert who managed to stitch these 6 differently written pieces into a, we hope, coherent whole. So thank you, Cindy, back there. Thank you, Cindy. I also want to note that a French language version will come later in the process. So there will be later in the process a French language version of the strategy document. I also want to note that we have a number, of course, of steering committee members here who are going to be presenting highlights from the document, but there are 2 other members of the steering committee who are in the room who I want to thank now because they've done a lot of the work in terms of the organization of this conference. So maybe as I call their names, they can stand and raise their hands. Monica Winkler from CCRW. Monica. And Kathy Podkapayeva from the Institute for Work and Health at the back of the room there. Okay, so what we'll do, I think, is each member of the steering committee can introduce themselves in turn as they speak to their part of the document, and we will just move to the first. So Kathy Hawkins is going to talk about the first couple of aspects of this, starting with the purpose of the document.
Good morning, everybody. So when we begin and talk about the strategy and what that looks like, one of the things that we wanted to articulate is that it's a strategic framework. And we wanted to build it up so that it was important for key community stakeholders, people with disabilities, employers, researchers, labor, as well as all levels of government. We also wanted to make sure that it identifies collaborative activities to increase the employment of people with disabilities. I think what's important to note in terms of the purpose of the strategy as well as the case for the new strategy, which is the next slide. Do you want to hit the enter button? Yeah, for the case, for the next slide, Ron. So it's important to think of this document as a snapshot in time, that it's a very fluid document, and while we recognize that there's been a new data set that's just been released, we want to make sure that it is as fluent as possible. So while this is just a snapshot, please recognize that information that connects with statistics will certainly change as the document lives and grows and as we continue to provide more consultation. But we did want to make sure that people understood that the reason why we developed this strategy was because of the recent developments in government and civil society, which indicates a growing collective desire to improve the situation. And we heard from Yasmin this morning that government is doing a great job, and we're looking forward to actually partnering these strategies with other work that's happening with government. So I think Alec is going to
Alec Farquhar is going to talk about how the draft was developed. Alec.
So I guess we're introducing ourselves. I'm a chair for engagement with the Center for Research on Work Disability Policy, but I've had my career mostly in workers' compensation as an advocate, as a senior official at our Workplace Safety Insurance Board, and an official at our Ministry of Labor. So I've seen disability issues from a lot of directions. And this document really comes from you. It comes from community across the country. It comes from many decades of lots of people trying to bring some form and strategy to a big societal issue. Lots of ideas have circulated. Lots of people have taken a run at this. The most recent version, the strategy you have in front of you now in draft form, and just to echo Kathy, it's a draft, it's a work in progress. It's very largely informed by the conference we had last year around this time in Ottawa. Many of you were here, and I'm hoping that you see your ideas reflected in it. We then had a really important roundtable of government officials that took place in June of this year, That contributed a lot of practical ideas, what people from different jurisdictions thought was doable, what they thought might fit together with other things they're working on. We then had an intensive period, the last, I'd say right up to about 3 weeks ago, where we as a group, reflecting a really broad range of experiences, pulled this together as a collective effort, calling on also our own background and experience in the area. So we're really hoping that the strategy resonates with you as a group, that you'll find something, or hopefully many things in it that reflect what you'd like to see in a national strategy. Having said that, we're all here to take it further and make it real.
And my name is Steve Mantis. I'm with the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Groups. I'm the chair of our Research Action Committee. I've been active for about 35 years in the disability rights and injured workers movement. And as we tried to develop this, this strategy, you know, we start with the vision. And the vision is about inclusivity. And as we say, we're talking about the people with disabilities have the same opportunities and choices in careers, job, and work. Now, we're building on the work of, you know, decades of activism from the disability community. So we didn't start from scratch. People have been advocating for these issues for many years, and we're really, you know, thankful for the work they have done and trying to build on that. And when we look at that vision, we as a collective, you know, or a steering committee come at it from different angles. I'm an advocate, I'm an activist. You know, I'm there, let's make the world a better place. And that vision is a collaboration. So, you know, my kind of one point was, not only do we want the same choices, but we want them to be good choices. And this is the dynamic of the strategy, is that we kind of go, we have a dream, but then we have our practical reality. And the practical reality is that the labor market isn't moving in the direction of good jobs for everybody. It's moving in a different direction, where workers are less valuable and are not so much that it's, you know, we're going to build that business with you for the rest of your life. So we're trying to mix our vision with reality. And I think as well, while we're all focusing on the disability in work, we have to remember that everybody is not able or really desires that choice of work. So as we look at the systems that support people with disabilities, we have to make sure that there's room there for people who don't choose work, that choose volunteer work, that choose other ways to contribute to society, and we want to promote that, and we don't want to have unintended consequences if we're all focusing on work. And we've kind of put the pillars together, once again, building on those that come before us. And one of the key pieces is nothing about us without us. So we try to integrate that into this event, into all of our activities, that we want to make sure people with lived experience are there all the time in our discussions and building forward. So we've developed these 4 pillars. Like, there's so much. It's so complicated. There's so many pieces to this whole strategy. We tried to organize it, as has been mentioned, in these pillars. And they're really interrelated. You know, when you start looking at how this works, and we want, for each one of those pillars, we want to have goals and outcomes that are measurable. They all kind of fit together. And so we do separate them so that we can document what they are, but they interrelate, and that's what inclusivity is all about. It's not about one way to create an inclusive workplace or an inclusive community. There's many factors, and we need to be able to talk about these and figure them out together.
Okay. over to Maureen. So what's going to happen next is Maureen and Emile are kind of going to take turns in taking you through some of the ideas that are in the draft strategy document about activities, initiatives that are proposed at a high level, but some specific ideas under each of the pillars. The first one being disability confident and inclusive workplaces.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maureen Hahn. I am the President and CEO of the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work. I am honored to be sitting here today. I think that I am just so pumped. I am so excited. I think that the next 2 days are going to be an incredible time for everybody in this room. And you can all look at yourselves and know that you're part of this movement. So congratulations. So the first pillar, as Ron has mentioned and as Steve has mentioned, is disability confident and inclusive workplaces. We feel that it's very important that we have to have employers at the table. During the next 2 days, you're going to be able to see some of the employers that we've worked with, some employer champions, as well as some union champions, and really seeing how it is that the landscape can be changed from an employer perspective. However, we recognize that employers do need supports in order for this to happen. According to Mary Ng, who is the new Minister of Small Business, 98% of businesses across Canada are small businesses, and that means they're less than 100 people. So when we're talking about HR departments, there are none. When we're talking about IT departments, there are none. And so how can we support these small businesses in order to make sure that their workplaces are inclusive as well? So, and I won't go through the all of the points here on the slides, but just to say that the development of these tools, not necessarily toolkits, but resources for employers, is really a focus of this of the first pillar.
Okay, I'm Emile Tompa. I'm co-director of the Center for Research on Work Disability Policy. I've been part of the steering committee for the last year and a half, and I'm really excited to be part of this process and pleased to have everybody here to be part of the process as well. It's really critical that it be a collaborative effort, and that's why we're thinking of this really as the starting point, really, and we're here to get your feedback to make sure that this reflects, you know, the diversity of ideas that we have here and across Canada. So I want to speak to just the second pillar that we have up on the slide. Okay, so comprehensive supports. This is a really critical part of our strategy. You know, employment just doesn't work unless there's really comprehensive supports. And some of the characteristics we see as very critical for comprehensive supports is having navigability of the different programs. As some of you may be aware, there's a lot of different programs across Canada. There's provincial ones, there's federal ones, there's private insurance, there's public insurance, some of them are means tested, some of them are contributory. They very much work in silos, and that's one of the big challenges for the disability policy system. And I like to think of the span total of these programs, as well as other service providers and employers, as being part of a disability policy system. A lot of the pieces of that system are working in silos. So it's very difficult for people to maintain their engagement in work, or when they're able to work, if they don't have the right supports when they need them. So really critical is navigability, alignment. A lot of the issues we talk about too are the education to work transition. Mandy mentioned this in her vignette this morning. Really critical aspect of having that continuity of supports when you start in the labor market after transitioning out of education. A number of other points are mentioned here. Really important that it meets client needs. Eligibility rules need to be coherent and accessible. Improving the supports for young people, as I mentioned. Really unbundle some of the income and benefits and employment for employment support, so that you can carry some parts of those packages with you when you go into employment. One of the issues we hear about a lot is the fear of losing those essential supports like pharmaceutical benefits and extended healthcare plans, you know, provision of other kinds of tools and technology and supports that you need when you go into work. So we really need to unbundle some of those things so that you can have a flexible support package that's customized to your needs. Some of it really needs to be sort of a passport that you can carry with you across the lifespan, actually, so that you can tailor it for your needs at the particular moment and adapt it as your needs change. Yeah, and so one of the other things that we've heard a lot about also is the fact that when people do enter into employment, there's a very high tax rate for the benefits that you did receive through some wage replacement benefits program, where you lose a large fraction of that very immediately. So that really needs to be modified as well, so it's easier to make that transition without being penalized harshly right at the get-go. And then the next slide is, I think, the next pillar.
Excellent. So the third pillar that has been identified through consultations is effective partnerships. Basically for this pillar, we feel that this is an extremely important one. Again, our work is in collaboration. It's not in isolation. It is inclusive, not exclusive. So in order to ensure that there are effective partnerships to foster the inclusive workplaces that we're looking to develop. That the supports are to both the individuals, the job seekers, the employees with disabilities, and also to the employers in order to be able to foster a successful relationship. And to promote that culture change that Yasmin had talked about earlier this morning as well. So a few of the key points, and it's actually it's the last point on the next slide, but really it should be the first point on the first slide, and that is that people with disabilities are involved in all the key activities that are proposed in the document that includes these partnerships, and that they're led by people with lived experience. The other few dots that we are very, very focused on is ensuring that governments are working together, municipal, federal, and provincial governments, and I'm so pleased to see so many of our colleagues here representing different governments over the next couple of days. Employer associations, leading employers, unions, our employer champions, our business leaders within the community, and also our educational institutions, so that we can talk about those transitions from work to school. Sorry, from school to work, sometimes back to school again. And then, of course, researchers. This has to be overlaid with research at every moment. We cannot continue to move forward without evidence-based information. We throw, with the new Canadian Disability Survey, CSD, we are so excited to be able to have that cutting edge information for us here at this conference, that we can then mull over and be able to make a plan going forward, again in partnership. And I think that the next pillar is yours.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to the pillar 4, which is about measurement and accountability. And this is a critical element of the strategy. As we all know, if we can't measure it, we don't know how well we're doing, we don't know whether we're making progress, we don't know whether we're reaching our targets. So it's really critical that we have a good measurement and accountability framework underlying this pillar. We want to have obviously some baseline measures, set some goals, identify indicators, develop data sets. There's the new CSD data set that's out there, but obviously we need more than that. We need to have an ongoing monitoring and reporting system to make sure we're making progress, that we're reaching our targets, and that we're moving forward. There's a number of other points here. Develop an outcomes framework. What are our targets? What do we want to achieve, and in what kind of time frame? There has to be a tracking mechanism for that system. We want to identify key indicators and progress towards success and the desired outcomes. There's a list of them on this slide here. I think we have the number, I won't go through that list. We have to collect data also in a way that facilitates research. We really think of research as being an underpinning of our way forward in order to have an evidence base to show that we're making progress, that we can identify where there's still gaps that need to be filled, that we can see where the problems are, where people are struggling, so that that evidence base identifies where we still need to put more efforts out to make progress. Really important to identify the data gaps in order to better understand where we are and where we need to go. Creating a repository as well of that database, so that there's a place for researchers and others to access that data, to get a sense of what's available to measure key outcomes, what's there to measure the progress that we're making. We also thought about creating a guide for evaluation of initiatives too. So various stakeholders in the system, employers, service providers, will want to have a good sense of how they can evaluate whether they're doing well. So having an evaluation framework would be a really important part of that, the strategy as well. And then also telling stories of success linked to the ideas of case studies, you know, very much under that first pillar about disability confident employers. If we can tell those stories, we know what works well, we know what are the successes, we know maybe it'd be generalizable to other organizations as well. That's a really important part of it, to tell those stories and have a repository also of those success stories.
Thank you to my colleagues on the steering committee. And so we do have some time to take questions. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed one. Sorry, Alec. Questions will wait, because the next piece is really important. Sorry, Alec.
I mean, we're all here. We're here to try to get something done. We're many in the room have had the experience that not enough has been done. This is a very serious process the next couple of days. I'm pumped just like Maureen. It's taken us a while to get here, and to have a deputy minister up here as we did, you just can feel there's a moment here. So this is real. Your input during this conference is real. We'll be revising the strategy based on that input. So really try to figure out what's missing, what could be improved, what you really like, you'd like to see more of, that kind of thing. Having said that, this is a relatively small circle of folks, even though it's a very important one. And we'll be looking at a consultation across Canada early in 2019. We'll be counting on everybody in this room to help make that consultation real out in the world, real in your networks, real in your communities, real with folks who may not have the voice that you have, and whose voice we really want to be heard. A vital aspect of what we're proposing is that at this point in time, this national strategy will not be a mandatory one. That is, it will start off voluntary. We did a lot of research on the history of these efforts, and we discovered so many of them that foundered on one province or another not being comfortable with one aspect or another, one partner, elections, all the rest of it. So we're looking at it as a framework to guide action rather than at this point in time focusing on trying to make it a mandatory strategy. And that concept is one we can talk about here, because clearly there are aspects of change that you really want everyone to adopt. You're hoping they see the value of them, but for now, that's what it'll be. Partnerships will be vital, making this real on the ground, and we're hoping to be identifying a lot of those partnerships the next couple of days and following. You heard from Emile the importance of data, benchmarks, knowing how we're really doing, and knowing that at a deep level, and we're getting a good start on that in this conference. We want to be documenting how we're doing, not just on the numbers, but on the key aspects, the pillars, and some of the initiatives we've identified. And we want to figure out a way to make sure that progress really is made and we gradually move toward a more consistent, effective approach along the lines indicated. And with that in mind, we'll be organizing another conference around this time next year, and it will be very different. It will be after a strategy is out there, after some folks here have started working with it, after we try to make it real on the ground, and we'll be talking very concretely on how we're doing, gaps, issues, where to go from here. So we're on a journey together here, and it's not a bureaucratic journey, it's a human journey, it's an economic journey, it's big, and we need everybody on that journey, and just tremendously looking forward to your participation in the next 2 days. Thank you.
Okay, now I will thank my colleagues on the steering committee. Sorry again, Alec. That was really important, vital, actually. So thank you for the reminder. For the outline of the highlights of the draft strategy document. So we do still have a bit of time before our break to take questions. I would suggest that at this point we focus on questions of clarification, because the bulk of the rest of the conference is going to provide opportunities for substantive input, how the strategy can be improved, how the draft can be improved. But if anybody has a key question for the steering committee now, where you want something clarified, then we have an opportunity for a couple of questions now on that. There's a roving mic available, I believe, in the room. So people could raise their hand if you have a question. So,
Hi, thank you for that presentation. It was great. I was wondering if you could speak more to the aspect of the strategy not being mandatory. I'm just concerned about what's the buy-in if it's not necessarily mandatory or supported by some sort of enforcement.
Maybe I'll start. We thought a lot about this. As part of the preparation of the strategy, we did some great research at Center for Research on Work Disability Policy, where we looked back over, I think, over 30 years of efforts to put together national strategies. This is not the first. I myself was involved in some of them, and I'd even forgotten aspects of them. Often, the bigger and the better framed it is, the more complex it is, the tougher it is to get enough buy-in to make it real on the ground in any reasonable period of time. The fact that it's not mandatory doesn't mean we don't hope that it will become real, and we don't hope that parts of it will get adopted. So for example, there might be a part of it about navigability of programs or portability of supports that really gain traction in one province or territory or federally, not in others for a while. And then there's some experience we can build on. So we're looking to this conference in December next year as an opportunity to take a look at some early adoption that we could get adopted elsewhere as we gradually move toward making it, I would say, mandatory might even be not a great word. I look at it as making it part of the fabric of society. I mean, you had a deputy minister up here very articulately showing her vision for making what we're talking about way more than a strategy, making it part of ordinary daily life.
Build on that?
go ahead, Steve.
I think the other part is that we realize we have no power to make anything mandatory. Like, we're all volunteering here, and so if any one of the sectors in society say, this is the way we're going to do it from now on, great. But we don't have the power to do that. So really, we're trying to say, let's work together to bring us to the place. So, you know, the legislation passed, what, yesterday, or the protocol was, so yeah, I'm all in favor of having mandatory pieces in society, but we can't make that happen as 5 people up here at the front of the table. All of us together say, this is the way we want it, let's do it.
And if I could add one thing to what Steve just said, I think one of the things we are trying to do, recognizing we don't have the power to make it mandatory, really. We collectively don't have the power to make it mandatory, but we are trying to design a document that reflects shared values and to develop a process where we can work towards consensus and get buy-in. And we tried to design the document at a fairly high level so that there would be opportunities to tailor specifics under each of the initiatives that are outlined in the document. The specifics might differ in different jurisdictions, but the principles, we're trying to get buy-in to the high-level ideas where action needs to happen. So our intent is to work with you to get towards that consensus and that buy-in.
I just want to add too, I guess there's strength in numbers, and so there's a lot of you out here, and you link up with your colleagues in your jurisdictions, and hopefully, you know, if there's enough of us working together on that same path, it'll become more compelling case. Some of the ideas we had was also to think about some easier wins at the short run. So our strategy has a timeline, and think about what we think we're capable of accomplishing in the short run, midterm, and longer run, and think about those easy wins for the front end to show that it's a compelling strategy, that it's worth undertaking, that there's win-wins for a lot of the stakeholders, that if we all work together, that we're all going to do better as a society. So hopefully we can find those first ones to take on as a challenge at the front end, and then move to those more difficult things such as navigability of the programs that I talked about, which might be a big challenge for the various jurisdictions.
So thank you for the question. That was clearly a kind of fundamental question. Thank you. We do have time for at least one more. I'm not sure who was, okay, great.
Hi, good morning. I want to say what an impressive piece of work this is. This is a tremendous compilation of the work that's been done to date, and I think it's actually even more impressive when you look at the connection that you've made with the International Convention on Persons with Disabilities. So the question I have is, it relates to the measurement and accountability, because I personally feel that this is going to be the greatest lever that we have, is making known to others where the progress has been achieved and what are the statistics around that. So my question in relation to that is, are you planning on collecting disaggregated data with respect to the different disabilities? And I ask that question because in the International Convention, they do specifically talk about collecting disaggregated data. And I personally think that if we're really going to track progress, we have to look at the difference between employment rates of and job satisfaction and so on of persons with for instance, a mobility disability who has, like Mandy, 2 degrees, and the progress made by a person who with an intellectual disability who probably doesn't have a high school diploma and who has probably the most difficult time getting into the workforce, as evidenced by how marginalized this population is and what a low employment rate they have. So my big preoccupation is how can we ensure that we disaggregate the data that we collect so as the progress of persons with different types of disabilities can be adequately tracked, and so it doesn't actually mask, by having a total number, we don't accidentally mask the progress of the various types of persons with disabilities.
I'll start being the researcher on this panel. That's a fabulous point, really, really critical. And one of the key things that I think is that, you don't want to be just looking, as you point out, averages. Everybody's individual experience really matters to us, so that we really have to look at subsets of various populations. There's such a diversity of issues and people's experiences that we really have to be respectful of all of them. So, definitely thinking about collecting micro-level data so that we know where people are struggling and what people need supports and when, kind of thing. Tomorrow there is a panel on monitoring and evaluation in the morning where we will have somebody from ESDC speak about the recent survey and some suggestions for measures that we can think about going forward, as well as somebody from the Labor Market Information Council, an organization that was just recently put together over the last couple of years that are focusing on pan-Canadian data resources to understand the labor market issues for various groups, and obviously people with disabilities is a very particular interest group that they're focusing on as well. So there'll be an opportunity to think about what we need to do and drill down a little bit on it as best we can over these couple of days, but certainly there's work to be done to make sure that nobody gets forgotten.
I think Steve has a comment and then we'll go to break. So Steve.
2 points. I guess the first point is we're not going to collect the data from up here. We all can collect the data. So the strategy is all about us, all of us. And what we want to do is try to build in more of an appreciation and prioritizing that the systems we have in place, the service providers, the funders, the government, all see that we need to spend more time tracking this stuff. So as an advocate for injured workers for like 35 years, I've been going to the compensation board and say, what happens to the people you serve? And they say, we don't know. And you kind of, what? Like you spend, billions of dollars and you don't know. So can we build in an appreciation and all levels that we need to be able to follow through? And that means different things in different sectors. So we're working with researchers. So you get a grant for 2 years to do an intervention, but you don't have the money and time to follow up and see what happens 2, 3, 4 years later. So the funding envelope has to look different in order so that we can collect that data going forward. So kind of looking at what are the barriers to collecting that, how do we overcome those so that we integrate that into like everything we do, so we kind of see, are we doing a good job, or where are the opportunities to improve?
Okay, thank you, Steve. And so
Quick. Do we have time for one
if
quick?
it's really quick,
It's really
'cause we
quick.
got to get to break.
Okay, it's sort of just more of a clarification. In the comprehensive supports pillar where you're talking about improving supports for young people, I see mainly you mention support for transition from education to work, but I'm wondering if the strategy will cover, you know, other transitions such as from secondary education to post-secondary, or from secondary school to work, like other less, I guess, conventional pathways to employment, but also transition supports before somebody is ready necessarily to go directly into job search training, for example.
You had a very quick question, and I have a very quick answer, and that is that absolutely. What we need to do is we need to hear that from you, and so that transitions are involved in the document. It has been identified as an area that needs to be focused on. But what do those transitions look like, and how diverse and how specific can they be? How individualized can they be? And I think that again, that will come from you. So while it's a great question at this level to get everybody thinking about it, it's what I would ask you to do is to bring that perspective, especially tomorrow afternoon when we're in our small groups, adding our thoughts to the strategy. Thank you.
Okay, so we will go to break now.